So today I'm going to talk about The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. She's actually quite a controversial author. Basically, she's one of those people where her views are very much appreciated by some of the people on the right, some of the libertarians and ultra-capitalist people. There's actually been some quotes about her that, you know, people who subscribe to her philosophy, there was some euphemistic terms previously which are pretty much all just slurs. However, I'm going to talk to you about why you should actually maybe read Ayn Rand. And that's not because I'm someone who's really conservative myself. I actually come from a background of, I voted Labour, which in the UK is the left-wing government. So left actually they've alienated many of the working class. I'm a vegan. Me and my wife, we care about the environment. Other than like my ridiculous book collection, which is not really out at the minute because, well, we're actually in the process of moving house. I would like to think of myself as quite environmentally conscious. So anyway, it's enough of politics, or at least in that sense. What I'd like to talk to you about is Ayn Rand's book, The Fountainhead. I've got this Penguin edition, which has actually got this beautiful portrait by Tamara de Lempicka. She basically, this is a painting that's a self-portrait of her driving, and what's really beautiful about it and ties in with the story itself is it's part of the Art Deco movement, which is really decadent, and it just kind of ties in so much with what goes on in the novel, to the extent that I kind of look at that image and in my head that's what Dominique Franken, one of the four main characters in this novel, actually looks like. Okay, so without further ado, I'll do a bit of a synopsis of what goes on in here. So basically the story is about a man called Howard Rourke, who is an architect. He is completely uncompromising. In no circumstance will he allow anyone to, the way he would perceive it, inflicts damage on his purity of artistic vision. And I mean, that sounds like something where potentially, you know, he's a guy who's full of himself. But I think what he actually really understands is that sometimes unity of vision can create something that's really, really beautiful in a way that a committee can't. The author herself, Ayn Rand, she's actually a massive critic of collectivism and a belief in individualism, for many reasons. The main one being that she actually kind of fled Soviet Russia. Her family were quite bourgeois, quite middle class. Her father's business was confiscated from them, and they fled the country. So it would be easy to see why someone who left socialist Russia, which is obviously not really properly communist because the abolition of private property never happened, but you know, a socialist government. When she came to the US, she saw the Manhattan skyline and she'd never seen anything so beautiful in her life. Probably one of the reasons that motivated her to write The Fountainhead, which at the end of the day is a book about architecture and these people building skyscrapers, as a testament to their own egos as well as other things. You could see how someone who was comparing the individualistic capitalistic societies of America and contrasting that with Soviet Russia would come to those same opinions. So we talked a little bit about the author. I was talking about Howard Rourke, the protagonist. Howard Rourke basically struggles and struggles and struggles some more. Throughout the novel, he's contrasted with Peter Keating, someone who basically just produces imitations of what's been produced before. If you think of someone who is the limits of their creativity is a copy which only succeeds in combining other copies in a way which is familiar and therefore good, because it clearly understands the style. That's the kind of creativity that Peter Keating and many of the architects throughout this novel express. Actually, this is quite a popular book among architects, and I can see why. Also popular among many young people who you know are driven particularly, and they like this idea of this clarity of purpose, and that like if you keep pushing and pushing and pushing, you will eventually get what it is that you deserve. And that happens to Howard Rourke. I think one of the things which is done really well in this, really well in lots of things from Game of Thrones to whatever you watch, is our protagonist is really put through the ringer. And he never loses sight of his goal. He never compromises on his principles, even when he's put in situations where it would, keep him in business and being able to produce architecture at the end of the day. If he's not able to do it on his terms, he's completely unwilling to accept anything less than his own personal ideal of perfection. And as someone who writes, I can say that, I've been in situations where there's been read-throughs and everyone's got their 2 cents, and sometimes people have conflicting opinions, and sometimes people have opinions that are quite different from my own, and you kind of feel like maybe you do stuff to placate certain people or groups, or, I've gone through, for instance, and like changed the gender of characters, or like tweaked a line so that it was like, my point is that sometimes in that process there's some dilution of what the original vision was. Sometimes by changing the gender of a character, you actually take away some of the critique or satire that was being made. But yeah, so basically, I think anyone who's into the arts will read this book and see some things that they can empathise with. So that's on the positive side. On the negative side, though, she kind of at times does preach some things which are, not good, let's say. For instance, she does recommend selfishness, and she thinks that pity is one of the worst qualities that a human can embody. While we might think pitying someone can be like a negative act to like look down upon someone, I think she kind of potentially doesn't mean that. She means that empathy perhaps is something which is not a quality that's necessarily particularly desirable, which I disagree with, but I am interpreting a little bit there. But basically, I would recommend reading this book if you have any interest in art, or if you really like to see characters who are really driven, and although you will sometimes be weighed down and bogged down in some rhetoric that the characters go through, I think it's safe to say that you're in good hands here in terms of the quality of the writing and the figurative language. She can really turn a phrase, and even though some of her characters, particularly Ellsworth Toohey, who is like a mouthpiece for everything she hates about collectivist philosophies, socialism, etc., I think it would be fair to say that there is some beautiful prose here and some interesting thoughts. And to be honest, as someone whose thoughts are so different from the author's, reading something that's a polemic on the other side, if you like, is something which I always find useful, because it can open my mind up to ways of thinking which I wouldn't necessarily see the validity in previously. And yet, reading The Fountainhead, reading Atlas Shrugged a few years ago, I found that actually I was able to understand some of her critiques of socialism more than I thought. Before that, I was very sort of liberal, naive, and although I'm still liberal, I thought socialism was the answer. If we could just all be socialists, the world would be a better place. But as time's gone on, I think I've been able to see that, just like Karl Marx did when he was diagnosing some of the problems with capitalism, Ayn Rand is able to note some of the problems of when we start to apply a model of socialism to an imperfect world. Because at the end of the day, there's limited resources, and socialism is not perfect as long as there is, going to be limited resources, because it almost... I'm of the opinion that both socialism and capitalism are needed together in order to have a productive society, and if it hadn't have been for reading Atlas Shrugged a few years ago, I would say that my politics were quite far left, pure socialist, in support of Jeremy Corbyn. As the years have gone on, I've been more, I guess you would say that my identity politics were left, and my economic stance was more centrist, because I can see the value and the merit of what's added to society when capitalism is allowed to respond to the market in a way that socially planned governments just can't. What I'd like to do is just read to you some of the quotes which I think exemplify some of those good ideas and sometimes some beautiful language as well. So, one of the key ideas in the book is the idea of clarity of purpose. Howard ends up being in a desperate situation at one point where he goes and works for this company, puts out some beautiful designs, and the person who's in charge, the architect, he mutilates these designs. He picks and chooses from one from another, adds them together, puts a little stylized representation of it, which doesn't add anything. But yeah, this is one of those key quotes. He had a system of his own. He employed 5 designers of various types, and he staged a contest among them on each commission he received. He chose the winning design and improved it with bits of 4 others. 6 minds, he said, are better than 1. When Rourke saw the final drawing of the Benton department store, he understood why Snight had not been afraid to hire him. He recognised his own planes of space, his windows, his system of circulation. He saw added to it Corinthian capitals, Gothic vaulting, colonial chandeliers and incredible mouldings vaguely Moorish. The drawing was done in watercolour, with miraculous delicacy, mounted on cardboard covered with a veil of tissue paper. So, I think one of the things that's interesting there is the language there is quite beautiful, but it's almost used ironically because Ayn Rand isn't of the opinion that 6 minds are better than 1, and instead what you have is 6 partial thoughts added together to form something which is less than some of its parts. And I think that Ayn Rand would be one of the first to tell you that sometimes democratic decision making can become what works for the lowest common denominator, which is not to say that that's my own views, but I think when it comes to artistry, having a single stakeholder, a director, someone who has that full creative power, and you don't have hundreds of voices from the studio coming in, producers saying that they want this, they want that, that can destroy that clarity of vision. This is an interesting quote on selfishness. It's in discussion about Peter Keating, who is contrasted with Howard Rourke in that instead of having integrity in his artistic ideals, he goes with whatever's popular in the moment to please other people. I've looked at him, at what's left of him, and it's helped me to understand. He's paying the price and wondering for what sin and telling himself that he's been too selfish. In what act or thought of his has there ever been a self? What was his aim in life? Greatness in other people's eyes, fame, admiration, envy, all that which comes from others. Others dictated his convictions, which he did not hold, but he was satisfied, and others believed he held them. Others were his motive power and his prime concern. He didn't want to be great, but to be thought great. He did not want to build, but to be admired as a builder. He borrowed from others in order to make an impression on others. There's your actual selflessness. It's his ego that he's betrayed and given up. But everybody calls him selfish. I think that rounds off nicely. I had one other quote I'd put aside, but I don't think is as important as those, and I don't want to make this video too long. So yeah, without further ado, I hope you enjoyed the video. Feel free to let me know down below in the comments. Thank you. Bye.